In the mid-1950s, Ford had a vision. They weren't just building another car, they were preparing what they believed would be a revolution on wheels. After years of careful research, endless focus groups, and mountains of marketing data, Ford was convinced they had cracked the code to America's automotive future, and they weren't shy about it. The company poured an astonishing $250 million into the project, the equivalent of billions today, making it one of the most expensive gambles in automotive history. This wasn't a side project. This was Ford staking its reputation on a brand new nameplate that would sit proudly between Mercury and Lincoln. Every detail was planned with almost obsessive precision. The styling was promised to be futuristic. The engineering was pitched as cutting edge. Even the name itself, Edsel, carried a mysterious weight, unveiled with great ceremony as if Ford had just discovered the future. To the public, the message was simple. This wasn't just a car, it was the car of tomorrow. But there was one small problem. When tomorrow finally arrived, it wasn't what anyone expected. When the Edsel finally rolled into showrooms in the fall of 1957, the reaction wasn't awe, it was confusion. Buyers expecting sleek futuristic beauty were greeted instead by a car that looked, well, strange. The most talked about feature was the front grille. Designers had imagined it as bold and distinctive, something that would set the Edsel apart on crowded highways. Instead, it quickly became the butt of every joke in America. Comedians on late-night TV compared it to a toilet seat. Others called it a horse collar. And worst of all, the joke stuck. Owning an Edsel didn't make you look stylish or forward-thinking. It made you look foolish. Many buyers admitted they were embarrassed to park theirs in public, knowing someone would point, laugh, or make a joke. But the Edsel's problems went deeper than just appearances. The car that Ford promised as revolutionary was about to prove that its flashy styling wasn't its only flaw. Ford promised buyers innovation, and on paper, the Edsel delivered. One of its biggest selling points was a gadget straight out of science fiction, the Teletouch transmission system. Instead of shifting gears with a traditional lever, you pressed buttons mounted right in the middle of the steering wheel. It sounded futuristic, almost space-age, the kind of thing that made other cars feel instantly outdated. But there was a problem. It didn't work. The Teletouch was notorious for jamming or failing at the worst possible times. Drivers would go to change gears and suddenly find themselves stuck, or worse, rolling into traffic because the mechanism refused to cooperate. What should have been the Edsel's crown jewel became a mechanical nightmare, and it wasn't just the Teletouch. The Edsel's engines, while powerful on paper, were plagued with oil leaks, overheating, and miserable fuel economy. Owners complained their shiny new cars guzzled gas and broke down far more often than competitors. Making matters worse, Ford rushed the Edsel into production, pulling parts from both Ford and Mercury lines. That meant inconsistent quality. Some cars rattled right off the showroom floor, others had electrical gremlins, and many left buyers wondering how such a heavily hyped car could feel so unfinished. The Edsel wasn't just strange looking, it was unreliable, frustrating, and expensive to own. And if the engineering wasn't enough to sink it, something much bigger was about to, the worst possible timing. If the Edsel had launched in a booming economy, maybe Ford could have recovered from its awkward design and unreliable tech. But the timing couldn't have been worse. The car hit the market during the 1957-58 recession, one of the sharpest economic downturns of the decade. Americans were tightening their belts, putting off big purchases, and avoiding anything that looked flashy or excessive. Buyers wanted practicality, value, and reliability, the exact opposite of what the Edsel represented. Ford's marketing team, however, didn't get the memo. They rolled out ads that painted the Edsel as a glamorous, upscale dream car. Billboards and magazines screamed about luxury and prestige. But to families struggling through layoffs and shrinking paychecks, that message fell completely flat. The result? Disaster. Ford had confidently projected 200,000 sales in the first year. Instead, they managed barely a third of that. Dealers who had spent fortunes preparing fancy Edsel showrooms suddenly found themselves stuck with cars they couldn't give away. And for the unlucky few who did buy one, the disappointment was just beginning. For the people who actually drove home in an Edsel, reality hit hard. Within weeks, complaints started flooding dealerships. Interiors rattled, transmissions slipped, electrical systems developed mysterious glitches. Owners who had expected a futuristic luxury car instead found themselves making constant trips back to the repair shop. But the mechanical problems were only half the misery. The Edsel carried a stigma. Park one outside your house and neighbors didn't envy you, they laughed. That infamous grille, mocked as a toilet seat, turned every grocery run or gas station stop into a public joke. Some owners later admitted they felt duped. one recalled bitterly. "It spent more time in the shop than on the road, and every time I parked it, someone made a toilet joke." Imagine paying extra for what was supposed to be the next big thing, only to become the punchline of America's automotive culture. Dealers suffered too. Many had invested heavily in special showrooms, sales staff, and advertising, believing Ford's promises of a surefire hit. Instead, they were left with unsellable stock and angry customers demanding repairs. The Edsel wasn't just a car that failed, it was a car that embarrassed the very people who owned it. And as word spread, Ford scrambled to salvage the brand. Ford knew the Edsel was sinking, but instead of pulling the plug immediately, they tried to patch the holes. For 1959, the car was restyled with toned-down features. The wild grille was softened, the bodywork simplified, and the marketing shifted from futuristic luxury to something safer and more conservative. But the damage was already done. By then, the name Edsel had become toxic. Buyers didn't see a new model, they saw a failure dressed in new sheet metal. By 1960, Ford was desperate. The Edsel lineup was reduced to little more than light reworked Ford models, stripped of any real identity. Gone was the flashy technology, gone was the bold styling, and gone was any chance of turning public opinion around. Sales collapsed. That final year, only 2,846 Edsels rolled off the line, a humiliating figure for what had once been hyped as the next great American brand. Just 3 years after its triumphant debut, Ford quietly killed the project, pretending as if the Edsel had never existed. But the industry hadn't forgotten, and neither had the public. When the dust settled, the Edsel wasn't just a failed car, it was a financial catastrophe. Ford's losses were estimated at $350 million in the late 1950s, an astronomical figure that would equal several $billion today. It became one of the most expensive flops in corporate history, and the damage went beyond money. The Edsel name itself became poison, a punchline that outlived the car by decades. Even people who had never seen one in person used the word Edsel as shorthand for failure. It was no longer just a car. It was a cultural symbol of how badly things could go when hype, arrogance, and bad timing collided. Marketing textbooks still teach the Edsel story as a cautionary tale. Companies study it to understand how overconfidence, poor design choices, and misreading the public can sink even the most powerful brands. For Ford, the Edsel was more than an embarrassment, it was a scar, a constant reminder that even one of the world's strongest automakers could gamble everything and lose. And yet, despite all this failure, the Edsel refused to fade into total obscurity. Despite all the jokes, the breakdowns, and the humiliating launch, the Edsel refused to disappear from history. In the decades since its demise, collectors and enthusiasts have embraced it, but not for the reasons Ford intended. Pristine Edsels now fetch impressive sums at auctions, not because they were perfect cars, but because they are symbols of one of the most spectacular failures in automotive history. Owning an Edsel today is almost like owning a piece of cultural lore, a car that tells a story about ambition, hubris, and how quickly public opinion can turn. The Edsel also changed the way car companies think about branding. Ford learned painfully that no amount of hype, futuristic gadgets, or marketing dollars could overcome bad timing, bad design, and bad execution. The car of the future had become a timeless lesson in caution and fascination. The story of the Edsel isn't just about a car that failed. It's about a perfect storm of missteps, styling gone wrong, technology that didn't work, marketing that missed the mark, and timing that couldn't have been worse. Yet, in failure, the Edsel found immortality. Its name lives on as a cultural punchline, a collectible curiosity, and a cautionary tale studied by marketers and automakers alike. Ford promised the car of tomorrow, but what they delivered was unforgettable in a very different way. Sometimes, history remembers the flops more vividly than the triumphs, and the Edsel is the perfect example. A bold dream turned disaster, yet one that continues to fascinate, warn, and even entertain generations of car lovers.